Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking about how to figure out which law school offer to accept. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're talking about how to figure out which law school offer to accept. Well, first off, congratulations. If you are weighing multiple law school offers, that's always a nice place to be in, even if it is a little bit. Yeah, I mean, it can be stressful, but you've got to recognize you're actually in a very good place. You get to decide. Lee, how did you decide which school to attend?
You know, for me, it was a lot about location was one of the big drivers and where I wanted to kind of settle. I was, 25 when I'm like trying to think back. I think I was about 25. And I had been living in the Bay Area. I had moved to the Bay Area the year before law school. And I think for me, I just really liked being here. And I was mostly deciding between the Bay Area and Southern California. And a lot of it just came down to like, where did I want to be living for the next 3 years? Where did I think I wanted those first jobs to be? And I felt this pull to stay in the Bay Area and to kind of start my next phase of my professional life here. I just wasn't ready to leave and clearly haven't left. So it was a good choice because it's like once you start, you can't stop. But I think that I was at a point in my life where I didn't want to move somewhere just for 3 years. I was kind of at a point where I'd been bouncing around and I wanted to feel like I could settle for a bit. And so that had a big part of my law school decision.
Yeah, for me, it was kind of the opposite. I'd been in San Francisco for a while. I was kind of burned out on it. And I decided randomly one day at lunch, I wanted to move to New York. And my friends were like, well, what are you going to do in New York? And I said, I guess I'll go to law school. And they said, you can't just go to law school. There's like a process to follow. But really, that was what motivated me. I mean, I applied other places. I applied some places in Northern and Southern California. But really, my goal was, I mean, I wasn't probably going to go to law school unless I went somewhere in New York. So, yeah, I mean, I think in the end, it comes down to these kind of idiosyncratic things oftentimes, but I think there are a lot of things people can and probably should consider, and maybe some that they think they really ought to weight highly that maybe we think are not quite as highly weightable, I guess, as people think they might be. So what do you think are some things to really consider? And we can talk through these in more detail later.
Well, I think the first is definitely ranking and prestige, although I don't think that necessarily just means the U.S. News and World Report rankings.
Right.
I think that, a law school's reputation is much more varied than that. I think that, sure, the Ivy League schools come with Ivy League reputations and the clout that comes from that. But especially if you're looking at practicing in a certain state, in a certain area, more regional schools that wouldn't necessarily be on the same rankings still can have great reputations locally. They have a lot of judges on the bench. They have a deep alumni network. They have a great reputation for just having great working lawyers in the community. And so I think that it kind of depends on what sort of prestige is going to be meaningful for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I kind of underestimated when I was looking at this, even though I guess in the end I ended up choosing the highest ranked school I got into, but for other reasons, I didn't really fully appreciate how hierarchical in a lot of ways the legal profession is. I had gone to a different graduate school in something totally unrelated, and I don't even know, honestly, like if there was a ranking of the best schools in the country for that category. If it did, no one really cared about it. It was all about kind of your work and your experience and the recommendations you got from professors and things like that. And I do think at some extent I underestimated how much it does matter, this hierarchy. That being said, I 100% agree with you that, just choosing based on like a magazine is not a great way to go. And it does depend a lot on the community you're looking in. But I think not to think that it matters would be naive.
True. And I think a lot of that also depends on what are your goals, right? I
Right.
mean, if you want to work in academia, you better go to one of those, top 10,
You should
top
probably go to
15
Yale.
schools. Yeah. I mean, like it's going to be easier to move into academia if you, have those credentials. If you want a fancy clerkship, it's going to be easier to get a fancy clerkship from these higher ranking schools. I think if you want to work at some of these really elite law firms, again, it's going to be easier to get those jobs because they recruit from these big schools. So part of it too is just what are your goals, and is that, quote unquote prestige that comes from those rankings going to make much of a difference for you?
Right. And I think you have to weigh that against other things as well.
Right.
Sometimes we get these questions of someone who's like, well, I got into this school that's ranked like number 25. That's not anywhere near where I want to be. And I'd also have to pay full price. But then I got in a school ranked number 30 something, and they're giving me a full ride, and it's where I want to practice, but I should pick number 25, right? And you're just like, no, don't
Right.
do that.
Right.
That is not what you should probably do.
Right. I should also add that when I was picking locations, it did help that the Bay Area school was going to give me money.
Right,
So
exactly, which
that
were like the
helped.
two next things on my list
Right.
of things to consider, which were location and money.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, free money is pretty attractive when you look at law school debt, which is obscene.
Insane. It's insane.
Insane.
It's insane. And again, I don't think people necessarily have a conception of what it actually means to your life to graduate with, say, $200,000 in student loan debt.
Oh my gosh.
That's so much money that you're going to be dealing with for such a long time. That, I mean, hopefully, if you can get the school to give you some of that, then so much the better, because it is there are ways that you can manage it, but I think people want to go in understanding what those ways are. So, do you plan to do public interest work or whatnot? Like, maybe there's a way to get some of this paid off, but you want to be sure you understand what you're signing up for here.
Absolutely. And when you're weighing the importance of the, debt ratio to possible income after graduation, I also think it's important to think about, if you're going to do public interest work and it's going to take you forever to dig yourself out of debt, do you really need that higher ranking school that's not going to give you money to reach your goals?
Right.
You got to ask yourself those very pointed questions.
Well, and I think it's often difficult to figure out what might make sense, say 5 to 10 years down the road, because what people don't necessarily understand is, okay, great, you've signed up for some sort of loan repayment program. When you graduate, you're working, the job you want, you're making very little money. Oh, but then you decide to get married. Oh, guess what? Like, that income is going to count against the income for whether you're satisfying the loan repayment. You may end up paying all of your loans at that point. So I think it's just worth really digging into kind of what your life may look like. And, you don't have to say you specifically, but what someone in your position and your age might generally look like 10 years out. And it could be a pretty good marker for what you might end up facing, essentially.
And I think sometimes it feels like monopoly money when you start taking out these loans. Like the numbers,
they'll just give it to you.
Right. They're just going to write you checks and you just sign paperwork, and you have a long time to repay them. But you do want to start thinking about the future. If you're at a point in life where you say, oh, well, I don't need to buy a house for the next 5 to 10 years, but you'll still be paying those loans.
Right.
That's
I mean,
the thing.
my loans are on the 30-year repayment plan because they're low interest rates. So every time I apply for a mortgage or a refi or something, they look at this and they're like, okay, so you've got this much money going out for the next whatever many years. All right. We're deducting that from what you can borrow. And I'm not even paying that much in the whole scheme of things.
Right. Yeah. And so I think that a lot of times folks don't really consider how long this debt follows you around.
And it's very, very hard to get rid of.
Yes.
So I think definitely take seriously the offer for scholarship money. Another thing which I think people kind of don't look at enough up front, and I would say these are two things, because the reality is law school is a professional career, right? Like, this is a professional school. It is, in theory, setting you up to get a job as a lawyer. So I think it's important to look seriously at the job prospects and also the bar passage prospects for the schools you're considering, because, if you can't pass the bar, you can't work as a lawyer. And it's not to say that you won't pass because the school's pass rate is low, but I think it's something to at least consider that I certainly did not even think twice about.
Oh, absolutely not. Okay, but I want to, I have things to say about this. But one thing I want to go back to, because I think we're around the money, I want to make sure this gets into the podcast, is your advice about negotiating between schools to get more money. I had no idea that this was even possible. Yeah,
we can talk about this in more detail later, but definitely flag that because it is a thing and you can do it.
Yes. Okay. So if you've got two offers and one of them is going to give you more money or some money and the other one isn't, just keep listening if we're going to talk about it more, but it's so important. And I wish I had known that information.
I definitely got more money. And to be fair, like the reason that I knew I could negotiate is that I think it was at the Admitted Students Day or something, like some school event at one of the schools that I'd applied to and gotten into. And someone there told us that, like, hey, FYI, like, you can negotiate. And we're like, what? Really?
I know.
And so I did, and they gave me more money.
Yeah. So it's amazing. Okay, now about job prospects and bar passage. This is so critical because some schools have some really quirky policies around admission. So there are some schools that like to let in like a lot of students.
Right.
But then they flunk out a bunch of students.
Yeah, and like then a third of the class or something.
Yeah, like a third of the class. And then sometimes they're trying to save their bar pass rate, but sometimes their bar pass rate is still low. And these should all be like flags that you see, because if the bar pass rate is low, that could be for a number of reasons, but that's not a great sign that you're going to be set up for success in passing. Right. And I think that schools love to kind of hide that information or not really talk about it unless it's really good. But you can get all of that information. Like, for instance, in California, the California Bar publishes like the pass rate for each exam by school. And this information is much more widely available, especially if the school's not publishing it. You want to kind of ask some really thoughtful questions. I would also see if you can find dropout rates because, if a school has a lot of attrition after the first year, I think that should be a warning sign too. That they're letting in a large class, but then they are flunking out a chunk of them. And I think that's a pretty brutal way to go to law school.
Yeah, it's definitely, I was going to say, just a really brutal experience that you're setting yourself up for because it's kind of the Hunger Games, It's like everybody's on a curve, you're fighting against each other. And this can play into the money thing too, because it might seem like you have this amazing scholarship, but if you are not going to be able to keep that scholarship moving forward, that is also a problem. So it's pretty common for most merit-based aid to have some sort of thing on it. But, if you're getting it at a school that expects you to stay there and keep it, it might be like, you have to maintain good academic standing. Okay, fine. Mm-hmm. But if you're at a school where a third of the class is flunking out, it might say you have to maintain a 3.5, which may not sound that high to you coming from a non-curved undergrad, but that's almost impossible in law school.
It really is. So you've got to dive into some of this data because it's going to tell you things that maybe the school isn't telling you. And I think that if you are doing some school hunting during these COVID times, I think that there's a lot more virtual stuff going on too. Not as much stuff as in person. Maybe you have visited the school, but how much time did you spend there? How many people did you get to meet? And I think it's got to be a trickier time to make some of these choices. You're going to have to do a little more digging to get more information because you're not going to meet as many people. They're probably not having big admitted student events in person where you're
just randomly telling people things.
Right. It's like you're just not going to get as much access to students. I mean, I remember going to admitted student things and lunches and all of that stuff. I mean, maybe some of that stuff is still happening, but it can't be happening at the same levels as it was pre-COVID.
Right. They flew everyone out to New York for like 3 days or something. Mm-hmm. So, maybe they're doing that now, but it would be a little surprising.
So along with that then come, the job and career prospects. So one, you got to get licensed. So that's, important. And then you got to make sure you can get a job in maybe the area that you want to. And I think that's where it is interesting to try and get information about like where alumni are working, Don't they publish like the percentage of alumni that are employed in the first 18 months after graduation or something like that?
Yeah. The schools have to publish all that data. I mean, clearly they're massaging some of it.
Sure.
But
like by hiring their own alumni? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, depending on the kind of economic cycle, I think there's more or less of that going on. But I think the Law School Transparency Project is still around, and they really try to dig into a lot of that data. So that might be a good source. I mean, I think you have to approach all of this information a little bit skeptically and realize the school is trying to make themselves look good, and we all understand that. But there is some underlying data that you can probably at least do comparisons on and things like that and kind of get a sense of what you're going to be signing up for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like most things, you've got to really own this decision. And they're going to give you marketing materials. They're going to, if they don't look good in their own marketing materials, then really don't go to that school.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the marketing materials are going to be like some great photos from our like broadly diverse section of students who are so happy with their outcomes. And, you know, there are probably people who are happy at every school. There are also people who are unhappy at every school. So you've just got to kind of figure out where you're going to fit in and where you're going to be happy with your prospects.
Yeah. And do you think people can like reach out to career services or try and get, you know, help from some of these offices to get more of a perspective while they're applying?
Yeah, of course. And I think that's always a good thing to do. I think anything you have questions about or you want information about, I mean, you are in the driver's seat at the point where you're the admitted student, but you haven't actually signed up or paid your deposit or shown up for orientation. You know, everybody's going to be trying to help you figure out if this is what you want to do. So you can ask for anything you want at this point.
Yeah. I mean, the worst they can say is no.
Exactly. And I think that's a sign too. It's like, oh, we're not going to give you data on job prospects. It's like, why not?
Right.
I mean, in some cases, you know, you even got to be skeptical about if the school is going to stick around. So I think you want to look at things like their accreditation and, you know, if they have any issues with that. I mean, some places are on kind of probation. They've got to make changes. You don't want to go to a school which is going to close in a year or two. Like, that's not a great place to be.
No, this happened in California pre-pandemic, and it was super stressful for students.
Yeah.
I mean, they really felt like the rug was being pulled out from under them.
And it was, I mean, it literally was, you know.
Yeah, it literally was.
Out, like, are you going to be able to transfer your credits? Like, what's going to happen? You know, I think you just want to make sure you know what you're signing up for in all these cases.
Yeah.
A couple of other things I think generally people think about considering that may or may not be important, as we can talk about. Specific academic areas of interest, whether that is like clinics or certificate programs or any of those type of things. And then also just the kind of the overall experience, your personal preferences, kind of the school vibe. You know, all these things are things to think about because this is a place you're going to be spending 3 years of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And also the people in your class are going to be your network. So if you don't like any of those people or you don't connect to them, that could be a problem.
Yeah, I think that that's very true. I think this can be a big consideration when thinking about going to a school where everyone is commuting versus where everyone is kind of closer to the school community. I think in metropolitan areas, that can be kind of a big difference. There are some schools where everybody drives in, goes to class, works at the library, drives out, and they're not going to have a social circle and a community. You might have students who are more established. Many of them have families. Some of them may be working and going to school. You know, I think there is different student profiles. So if you are kind of fresh out of undergrad and looking for that kind of typical grad school experience, one of those schools might not be a great fit because you might be like, where is everybody?
Right.
Where's
like I don't even want to hang out with.
Right. Like, where's all the social stuff where we become friends and everybody's gone home because they have established lives that they need to take care of? You know, I think.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Some of these schools that have a more kind of commuter reputation are great schools. It's just a different dynamic of like who's at the school, generally speaking, and kind of how the social and community aspects function.
Yeah, definitely. And if you are a person who has external responsibilities, that might be a better fit for you because everybody else will too. And they're not expecting you to go every Thursday night to like bar review and get completely hammered with them because you're home like tucking your kid into bed.
Right. Yep.
So I think this is all about really finding the right fit and then hopefully finding that right fit at the right price.
Yes, I think that that's true. And, I think you are going to spend 3 years of your life there. So you want to try and be happy. Like, it shouldn't, a lot of people talk about law school being like a terrible experience. But it doesn't always have to be terrible. There can be a lot of like either where you're living is great, or you make great friends, or you are intellectually stimulated, or you're working towards the goals that you want to work towards. Whatever it might be, you should try and find something that you're excited about. You're going to invest a lot of time and money into this experience. You should try and enjoy it.
Yeah, and I think it is important to look at kind of the school's reputation in terms of things like politics or even partying, and see like, am I going to be, yeah, exactly, competitiveness, friendliness. Some are notoriously more friendly kind of experiences than others. And really look at also like, am I going to be an outlier here on like some aspect of the school profile, whether that might be age or family or race or ethnicity. And it's not to say that, oh, well, because I'll be older than everyone else, I shouldn't go there. But what you want to look for is there going to be a sufficient community to support me around that and make me feel like I fit in? And if not, then I think that can be a pretty big red flag.
And one of the ways that you can like learn about the school community, I think, would be researching the active affinity groups on campus.
Definitely,
so
which exist for like all kinds of things.
All kinds of things. But, I think you could reach out to whoever's running student services or even the dean's office and ask for a list. You could even reach out to the officers for certain groups to find out how active they are, what kind of events they do, what kind of support services they facilitate. And I think that that would be a great way to learn about the community. If the school has a group that you really resonate with, but it never meets and they don't even have any officers, well, that's not going to be able to support you. But a lot of these groups are very active and have extensive mentoring programs and offerings. And then that's like an automatic community and support network for you.
Right. And oftentimes, if you have identified in your application that you are of a certain, affinity, people may actually reach out to you. And I think that's a great way. Obviously, again, like these are people who have been either chosen by the admissions office or volunteered or whatever to help you, help convince you to go there. So again, you have to be a little skeptical, but I think it can be good to talk to students who are similarly situated about whatever concerns you might have, because that's really what's going to inform your experience probably more than the overall reputation of the school.
Yeah. And I think there's the only way that you can really learn is just by exposure. I mean, anytime you're trying to, when we were looking at schools for my kids, it's like you just have to keep going to things, keep meeting people. It will, I think, become clear to you what feels like a good fit and what doesn't.
Yeah. And I think you do know. I mean, I'm thinking back for when I was applying to college, and the college I started at, I knew was not really a great fit for me. And I did it anyway for various reasons and ended up transferring after a year because I hated it. And I probably should never have started there. But in retrospect, we see that at the time. I was like, well, it seems like the best of these options. My parents don't want to pay for this other school, so I guess I'll go here. Right. And, I survived. It was fine. I transferred somewhere else. But I do think if you can get it right to start with, it's going to help.
I specifically remember walking through campus one evening when I was visiting the college I ended up going to, and I just thought it felt like home. I was like, this is like where I want to live, outside of all the other stuff. It's just, it felt comfortable. It seemed fun. It just had the vibe was a good fit, and it was a great fit. So it's like a lot of times you just have to give yourself the opportunity to get that gut feeling.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you haven't visited yet, if you can, that's super, super helpful. Obviously in the pandemic times, that's harder. But I think if you can sort of set foot on campus, attend a class, walk through where you're going to be eating and living and all of these things, I mean, that more than anything is going to help you feel comfortable in this actual space, which is important. Well, let's talk about location actually a little more because, I think ideally you would go to law school in a location where you think you might want to practice. But what if people aren't sure where they want to live long term?
Yeah, then I think you want to make sure that your school is not so regional that it's not that alumni network and that prestige from that school is going to have enough reach to do what you want to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if you have no idea, then you're putting yourself into a more difficult spot, because you do need to probably go to a school that is higher ranked, that has a more national reach, so that you can make up your mind, as you go through this experience. You probably don't want to go to a very hyper local place and then try to move across the country and everyone's like, I've never heard of this school before. Like, I don't know who this person is.
Now, that being said, I know specifically places like, I would put DC in this category, where there are a lot of transplants for various things. Right. And I had friends who were pretty invested in the Bay Area who ended up wanting to move to the DC area, and they just hit the pavement and worked really hard. They had to work harder, I think, to get their foot in the door, but they were able to establish their careers back there. And I think it just takes more legwork, like most things. You're just going to have to do a lot more networking, more resume drops, maybe interview for more jobs. You may not have the benefit of the same alumni network or just recognition of the school. It can still be done, but it's going to take more legwork.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like it's impossible, but also if you're pretty sure you want to work in DC, there are lots of law schools in DC that you could go to. So
true. Yes. A lot of them have a government focus too.
Right. So. This is a great example of where the rankings are probably less important. If I'm going to try to work in DC, I'm probably going to be better off coming out of American University Law School than I am coming out of some place that's higher ranked that is not anywhere close to there. That's the reality of it.
Yep.
So, I think this is always a balance, but it is certainly easier if you're at least willing to start your career in the place that you're in law school. And I think also with location, this also intersects with money, because as you've got to look at your housing costs and your options, and is the school providing any housing if it's in if it's in a very expensive city, and if they are, is that an option you would actually want to live in, or are you kind of over a dorm?
Yeah. And a lot of that is, again, stage of life, right? What do you have going on outside of school? I was definitely at a point where I'd been living alone and working at a corporate job, and dorm life was not appealing to me.
And that was, when I was deciding between Columbia and NYU, that was one of the things that came down to is NYU is basically kind of a dorm. And I'm like, I don't think so. I mean, I had roommates at Columbia, but we had a big pre-war apartment and we each had our own room and it was fine.
Yeah, roommates are different than dorms.
Yeah, it was I'm not sharing a room with someone anymore. I'm sleeping in a twin bed. No way.
And sharing a bathroom on a floor with a lot of other people.
I've done this. This is not where I'm at. Sorry.
Yeah, it is hard to go back once you've had a real grown-up job. It can be very hard to go backwards.
So again, it's there's no one right answer. But I think, particularly in expensive cities, you got to look at housing, because the housing is going to end up costing a lot of money.
A lot. Yes, a lot.
Well, let's talk about negotiating. Speaking of money. So this is actually, I think it's intimidating, but it's actually pretty easy. Basically, all you need to do is send a letter to the school that you're most interested in or you're trying to negotiate with. And this would generally be, I guess, to the financial aid dean or whoever has sent you your offer letter. And you basically very politely say something along the lines of, I'm very interested in attending. This is my first choice school, if that's true. And I have this other offer from this other school. And, I'm just wondering basically if there's anything you can do to make this decision a little easier for me. Here's the other offer. And then they'll either say yes or no, basically.
Yeah. I think the idea that they even have discretion is just something that most people don't ever consider.
Oh, I mean, this is all a game. They're trying to get you there, paying the highest amount of money you'll pay. You're trying to get there, paying the least amount of money that you can pay. And, the worst they can say is, no, this is our best and final offer, in which case you have that information at least.
Yeah, you can still take it. It's not like you're threatening to not take it.
Yeah, they're not going to take it away from you. I mean, at that point you say, thanks for your consideration. I'll think about it.
Yep.
So I think
this is so
definitely
underutilized.
ask. So totally. I mean, and even if they give you like $5,000 a year or something, that adds up.
Oh my gosh, $5,000 a year still doesn't include interest. Like, that's the thing with the loans. It's like, it's not $5,000 with the loans. It's like interest and this and over time. Take the $5,000.
No, I mean, if $5,000 extra for a financial aid office is like, okay, whatever. Like, sure, we'll throw that in, you know?
Right.
So yeah, if you have anything, and it doesn't even have to be like a super comparable school, but if you have any, even if you're listening to this when you're applying, you should apply to some schools you'll probably get money from so you can then use it to negotiate.
Yep. So true.
Yeah, I don't know. There's so many things. It's kind of giving me a headache, just all the considerations here.
I mean, it is an exhausting decision. I think that that's for sure. But I do think that you just want to collect all the information and then sit with it for a bit. You know, try and give yourself a little time, take some walks, let it percolate. Because there are a lot of factors and you kind of need to give yourself time to like weigh them all, you know, and then I think you can try and go visit and then also take some walks, let it percolate. You know, I think you've just got to really weigh all of these factors so you can get kind of that gut feeling of what feels right to you.
Yeah, and I think this is definitely one of those cases where, like, yes, on the one hand, you want to look at the data and you want to be analytical about it, but on the other hand, you can't only do that. I think this kind of balance between like the analytical part and the gut feeling part is what's hard and also what's really important.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, any final thoughts on this, Lee, before we wrap up?
No, I just think, remember that this is exciting. This is a new chapter, and try and think about also where you'll just be happy. Because I think if COVID has taught us anything, is that we have to somewhat live in the moment and, you know, enjoy the moment that we're in as much as we can. And so you don't want to sign yourself up to say like, well, I might be miserable for 3 years, but whatever, it's 3 years. I think we should just try and make, you know, be happy in the situations that we're in. And this is a choice. So make the best choice you can.
And also remember, nothing is irreversible.
True.
You know, I think if you end up getting to a place and realizing, okay, maybe this wasn't the greatest decision I've ever made. I'm not happy here. I think I should have done something differently. Well, there are ways to get out of it. You know, you can drop out, you can reapply, you can transfer. You're not actually stuck. So hopefully that might make the decision a little less fraught, and that, you know, it's always going to be something that you can get out of. You're not necessarily signing up for this for the rest of your life. So
yeah,
nothing is irreversible. I mean, except, you know, death or something like that, but
taxes.
Yeah. But generally speaking, a decision like this is not something that you cannot later do something differently. Like, people will do different things, and you could be one of those people.
Great.
All right. With that slightly incoherent monologue, we are out of time. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Alison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com. Or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.